Yeah, absolutely. I think the example of having children is kind of a good one to reflect on because it's such a classic example for people in their 20s or early 30s. It's one of those dilemmas. And I think if you're thinking of health long term, it provides a number of interesting lessons because I suppose like one of the objections to having kids, a lot of people would have would be that they don't want to sacrifice their freedom, that they're effectively trying to cling on to youth, that I want to stay young. I don't want to be out of that phase of my life. And they almost view the loss of freedom that comes with having kids as sort of entry into a new life stage and the point at which they stop living for themselves. And that's something that you kind of think of as being negative when you're in that mindset. Like you're like, oh no, I want to live for myself. But the flip side of that is that wouldn't it be even better if you were living for something more than just yourself? Wouldn't that be a nice way of living? And that's something that a lot of people with kids will tell you. You spoke to my own parents about this, and they say that you only grasp it when you have kids. So I don't have personal experience there. But the point there is that there's something that is, above and beyond just living for yourself and being an individual. And that's only something that becomes illuminated later in life. And that's the difficult thing, because especially for us kind of, young, high testosterone males, we're like, I can do whatever I want on my own. I'm a lone wolf or whatever, until you get hit with something, whether it be an illness or a difficult point in life, and you realize that you actually do need your friends, you do need your family. And that was something that I definitely traded off a lot on in my early 20s when I was kind of more obsessed with the kind of bodybuilding side of things. I was happy to just not spend time with my friends and just, pursue my own path, like prepare my meals, be super disciplined, train all the time, which was really good for me. Like it built me and developed me more than anything else. But there was still a significant trade-off that I wouldn't be willing to accept further along in life, into my 30s, 40s, 50s, having basically no time with friends, not having time to spend with your family and so on. It's a bad mindset to be in. And I remember thinking back to that time, I used to kind of envisage my future. And one of the things that always clicked with me was, am I really going to be this type of person forever where I just prepare my meals all the time and don't eat with other people? Like what about if I have kids and I have a family? Like, am I going to be okay with, having a family dinner? Is that going to be something I'm going to get comfortable with at some point? And it's not that I would never do that, but it was just at that time, I was in that mindset of 4 to 6 meals a day, prepared from scratch by myself, eating from a lunchbox. And I thought about my future and I was thinking, God, I don't know if that's something that I want in future. And eventually I drifted away from that. But that's something that will be very intrinsically linked to your health, because if your decisions, although they're healthful from a nutrition perspective, are made at the expense of your social life or the strength of your relationships and your support network, etc., then that's actually something that could have a net negative effect on health long term, despite the fact that if we were to analyze it on a nutrient by nutrient basis, you'd be doing a fantastic job. You'd be satisfying all the things we talked about in the last episode. You're keeping your salt low, you're thinking about your polyphenol intake, all this sort of stuff. That's fantastic. But if you can do that while also having a well integrated life, I guess, into your community, both micro and macro community, then you're doing a far better job. And that's something that you see emerging in a lot of research, where sometimes you see these sort of anomalies related to nutrition in particular regions of the world, or particularly some tribes and stuff like that, where you look at like researchers will be looking at just nutritional epidemiology, where they're trying to study the role of nutrition in health. But it's when you really look at the context of the nutrition that you really see why certain practices are healthful. A classic example of that would be, things like the Mediterranean diet. People will often ask, oh, what's the Mediterranean diet? And they'll list out the characteristics and they'll say, oh, it has red wine and it has this, that, and the other. But the things that are not often discussed from a nutrition perspective are the fact that there's very often in some of the area studies, there's a heavy emphasis on, family meal time, that, you're sitting down, you're having this meal slowly, you're sitting down for a couple of hours, you're sipping at your wine. It's not the same as consuming this same amount of nutrition in like a binge eating context on your own, watching Netflix and then downing a bottle of wine. Like it's not the same context overall. And that's something you see consistently in the research outside of nutrition, that when you look at loneliness and social isolation, that predicts basically worse outcomes for every disease state, maybe other than communicable disease, because you're not with anyone, you're probably not going to catch any viruses or whatever. But in general, for heart disease, neurological disease, etc., if you're isolated and you're not part of a community and you're lonely, and even perceived loneliness is something that tends to even supersede actual loneliness, the psychological dimension of that, that's something that predicts much worse health outcomes long term. So even if you're doing all this lone wolf stuff, dedicated to your exercise, dedicated to your nutrition, you're doing it all alone, and there's nothing else other than you counting your macros and counting your reps, that might leave some gaps in your health approach long term.
100%. And I think we will get back to talking about community a bit more in a second.